It's a great honor and a great pleasure to invite Professor Sandro Galea to speak to us this morning. Professor Galea is Dean of Public Health at Boston University. He's an author of the amazing amount of over 600 papers in peer-reviewed journals, books, chapters. I've had the great opportunity to work with him and be impressed both by his working brilliance and his unique way of presenting very organized presentations on very complicated topics. And I'm sure that this presentation will be as good as the previous ones. So please, thank you for coming to Galea.
Well, thank you very much. That was a very kind introduction. I can only do worse than that, so I will try my best to live up to it. Thank you for having me. So I was asked to talk a little bit about the future of public health education, which is a very grand topic. And I want to do this in two ways. Number one is I want to talk a little bit about what I think is happening in the field and why we're even talking about this. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about our experience at Boston University, and that we have been we have a large teaching program, as do many sort of big American schools of public health, and I want to tell you a little bit about what we are doing and the changes we are making insofar as that's useful to everybody here in terms of your thinking about what you want to do. So before I start, I want to acknowledge Lisa Sullivan. She's our Dean of Education. She is really the architect behind what we are doing as a school, in our educational program, and if you proceed with making the kind of changes or implementing kind of programs that you have in mind, she is someone who you will want to get to know in future. So let me, where's my, not this, maybe this? There we go. All right. So let's start with this. So whenever you start talking about the future of something, I always feel like one of the questions is, why bother? Why are you bothering with talking about the future? Why are you bothering with changing anything? You're doing things the way they are. And I suppose there is some merit to, thank you, that's good, actually. So I can walk out then.
I hope
you want to take it out?
No, I'm just, yeah, it should be okay, I hope. I'm not sure, I didn't check it. I don't know.
Yeah, there we go. Okay. So the question is, why bother changing? Because otherwise, you're doing what you're doing. Everybody's busy. Nobody needs to change anything. So why bother looking at doing things differently? So I always feel like when we're in education, which I am, which you all are, you're doing your day-to-day, and you're doing so much of your day-to-day that it's easy to forget what's happening in the outside world. So I just want to show you some pictures as to what's changing and why public health is interesting, why it's a very interesting time in public health, and why I think education should change to meet the changing demands of public health. I'll start, this is the United States. I'll start with our country. Everybody knows that Americans are all fat, but I don't think anybody realizes how quickly Americans have gotten fat. This is a map of the United States, and the darker the color on the map is the obesity in American states. And I just want to run through the past 20 years very quickly. So this is 1990 to that's America. So that's how quickly we have gotten fat over the past 20 years. And I think it's very important to keep in mind. And it of course makes you think about things in a very particular way, because you realize that this is 20 years. 20 years is nothing. It's a blink of an eye, right? But we have gotten much, much more obese in the past 20 years, which of course becomes an enormous issue for public health, and it raises very important public health issues as to why is this going on. So for example, when you see a picture like this, you might say that, where should we intervene? It's not plausible and reasonable that what's happening is that our genetics are changing over the past 20 years, because obviously they're not. Of course, in America, what we have done is invested most of our money in research on obesity in genetics in the past 20 years, which is entirely counter to logic with something like this. But I want to show you that because I think this represents a dramatic change that's going to affect the health of the populations in the United States. Let me look worldwide. Here's something that's tremendously changing how we all live. This is 1960. This is the world in 1960, and the countries that are in the dark blue are countries where half the population was living in cities. And if you go around the world and ask people, name the big cities of the world, people will say, Paris, London, Tokyo, New York. But that's a conception of cities from 1960. If you look at the percent of the world living in cities, where more than half of the residents of countries were living in cities, this is 1960, 70, 80, 90, 2000, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. By 2050, essentially the entire world will be urban. So we are now all living in cities. We are now all in a context which is in many ways directly amenable to public health intervention. We are now living within the same set of exposures that gives us a tremendous opportunity for us to do something about them as public health. And these are rapid changes. In 1800, 5% of the world's population was living in cities. By 2050, we'll have nearly 3/4 of the world's population living in cities. 200 years in human history is, again, nothing. So these are interesting times in the factors, in the social, cultural, economic, political factors that shape the health of populations. And as a result, I think there is an imperative for public health to respond in kind, to start thinking about how is it that we do what we do, how is it that we teach our students, and how can we teach our students differently. Here's another trend that is critical to population health. So this year, I don't know how many people realize that, is the first year that there are more people who are over age 65 than there are under age 5 around the world. It's a tremendous change, right? And look at how the lines are diverging very, very quickly. So we are dealing with a rapidly urbanizing, an aging population, a population where the drivers of non-communicable disease like obesity are changing and increasing very quickly. All of these forces are conspiring to change the face of population health as we know it, and it should also inform what we do in public health. Now, so that's public health broadly. Now, what about higher education? So where are we going with higher education in public health? And how should this inform what we do? So this is sort of some key trends in higher education, which I think are, generally speaking, recognized. They certainly are in our context, and I see no reason, when I was preparing for this talk and looking a little bit at higher education in Israel, I really see no reason why it's actually different here than it is for us. So, number one, demographics. So, education higher education for a long time has been the domain of the affluent, those who are comfortable, who in different societies, I mean in Israel, your price of education is much lower than it is in our context. In some European countries like France, education is free. But it has consistently been the easier purvey of those who are privileged. That's changing, and is going to be changing all around the world. And that, of course, introduces a lot of elements, a lot of challenges to how we do education. I think it's a very positive change, but at the same time, it is a change that one must grapple with, that we are dealing with. We're going to be seeing a more diverse student population, and a more diverse student population bringing different perspectives to their education. And you may have heard in the United States, we have a presidential election coming up, and one of the candidates for Democratic nominee is really floating on this promise of free college education. It's an empty promise. He cannot deliver on it, but nonetheless, it's very popular. These issues are going to become more and more issues. I think we will always continue to have strata of education, from elite education to education for the masses, but we are going to be seeing people from all walks of life entering education, bringing diverse perspectives, and I think our education needs to grapple with that, number one. Number two, perceptions. In our context, student debt is a big issue. I think it's less of an issue in your context, but the notion of value for tuition dollar is an issue worldwide. And that students are facing opportunity costs by taking higher education. And the question is, what value are they getting for that? Why should they do that? What are they giving up by doing higher education? And as a result, why would they want to come to a particular institution? Why do they want to come here versus another institution? And I think institutions are beginning to wake up to the fact that it is the market is shifting from a supply side market to a demand side market. Meaning that I think in the good old days, 30 years ago, universities could wake up, do whatever they wanted, and students sort of drifted to the university fairly just because the universities were there. But that's changing. Students are becoming consumers, and students are choosing where they go and what programs they go. And actually, I think it's good. I think this is a positive. It's a positive for universities. Transparency, demanding accountability. Why should I come to you in your university, and what am I getting out of it? Show me that there is value to me in coming to this university. Show me that there's value to me in spending my time learning from you. What are students like me getting out of it? Why should I bother? And I think this is particularly the case in an era that we are emerging into. Certainly we have it in America, and I think you have it also in Israel, where there is an elevation in cultural mythology of the entrepreneur, the innovator. And in the US, this, I think, is becoming increasingly a problem, where universities are seen as not entrepreneurial, not innovating. And the smart entrepreneurial students are saying, well, why should I spend my time there when instead I could not go to college and do something that actually gets me off on a path? And I think this is a real emerging trend that we need to deal with in higher education. And sustainability. How sustainable are we? How sustainable are our universities and colleges? Are we building structures that can withstand these kind of changes? I think these, and this is, I have citations here. If anybody's interested afterwards, you can have the slides and you can see the citations. I think these are broadly recognized as where higher education is headed. So here are the shifting paradigms. We're going from this notion of teacher-centric to learner-centric, that we are moving from saying, I am the teacher, you will sit there, I will lecture, you will leave, and you'll be happy. That's shifting very, very rapidly. I think it's a generational shift in that. And here's the bad news. The bad news is it makes for a less easy life for the professors, right? It just does. It's easier to come into a class, stand in front of class, be adored, and say, I will tell you what I want to say, nobody challenges me, then I go to my office and I don't want to talk to you ever again. Let's face it, it's easier. But that's not where we're going. And here's the good news. This is the right thing. This is appropriate. This is exactly what should be happening. We should be moving to a more learner-centric model. And I'm actually very, in general, as you can tell from my tone, I'm very optimistic about these changes. I do think they will introduce challenges for universities, but I think they're the right changes. We are headed in the right direction. Faculty-centered to student-centered. Students are becoming consumers. In a globalized world, it is, but we all used to benefit. Those of us who are in higher education used to benefit from a certain parochial hegemony, right? You have your students who are in your area, and they sort of drift to your university because, well, they're close by, and maybe their parents went to your university, and that's enough to keep us all employed. Well, in a global world, when the generation of teenagers now, 20-somethings, have no problem with having relationships over continents, it similarly have increasingly no problems in going to become consumers of higher education in other countries. And this is more and more so in public health. In public health, American students go to Europe for their public health graduate education all the time now, dramatically more so than they did 10 years ago. From memorization to application, this is particularly true of graduate education, that we are moving away from simple rote memorization, from simple rigid curricula, to students wanting to know how this applies to the real world, particularly in graduate education. This ties in with some of the trends I talked to you about earlier, where the notion is that, look, I've done my undergraduate, I'm now thinking about doing graduate education, and I'm doing graduate education because I'm interested in the real world, so how is this applying to me? From disciplines to integrated. Academics exist in disciplines. I'm an epidemiologist. I was trained by the tribe of epidemiology. Not that different than people of Israel, it's people of epidemiology, it's the same thing. And the thing about these disciplines, they're very useful. They're not going to go away. They're very useful. They're very useful for me, they're very useful for my students. The problem is, for my own doctoral students, they're not particularly useful for the masses of people in higher education. Because masses of people in higher education, they don't come for my discipline. They come for a broad learning in their area. So we are moving away from having the formal education, from being this narrow discipline-based approach, to a more integrated approach, particularly in public health, where we're dealing with complex problems the solution to complex problems does not exist within disciplines. It exists at the interstices of disciplines, and education needs to reflect it. And from content to competencies, meaning it's not just a matter of, I'm not just teaching you what I want to teach you just because I want to teach you, but how is it that what I am teaching reflects the competencies that you, the student, should get at the end of your education. Now, I'm going to shift from broader now to a little bit narrower. So let me talk about master's education. So master's education in the world and in our context is growing dramatically. Over the past 10 years, master's enrollments have increased steadily, and about half of that has been in education, business, and health sciences broadly. This is graduate education in the United States. This is in 2014, and what you see is that the overwhelming number of degrees that we are giving are master's degree. You see it right here, it's the red bar. We give doctoral degrees, but really almost less than 1/10. And then there is a growing need and market for graduate certificates. And graduate certificates, in our context, reflect higher education that is non-degree bearing. And we are seeing that gaining in popularity, particularly with continuing students. With you have students who they've trained, they've gone off into the workforce, let's say they're paramedics, but all of a sudden there's a new development in the field. They have a life now. They have family, they have children, they have a job. They don't want to come back. They don't want to come back and get a degree, but they want something. They want something. And graduate certificates are emerging as an important way of giving students something. My bet is if we're having this presentation 10 years from now, this bar will grow quite a bit. I don't think that's going to grow very much. I think this is going to grow. So that's broadly. Now let me narrow into public health, which is what I know you're all interested in. So let's now talk about public health a little bit. So this is the number of applications to public health in the United States. This is in the past 10 years. 2005 is on the left. 2015 is on the right. So we had 26,000 applications in 2005. This is all the schools of public health. And up to 80,000 in 2015. Now obviously this trend is not going to continue. You're not going to see this sort of going all the way up forever. But of course it has fueled an enormous rise in interest in public health in our context, and my sense is that countries like Israel you're lagging behind us, and that you are going to see the same thing, in that there is this increased interest in public health. And you stop and think about it, it's like, why is that? Well, there are several reasons for that. Number one, public health is ever more prominent in world news. Simple things like Zika, which are immensely motivating for young people. Number two, when you think about it, public health has become the graduate education that is the most obvious graduate path for a student who has an orientation towards social justice, improving the world. If you think that there really are very few alternatives for a student in the graduate school realm. You have social work a little bit. In our context, social work has become very clinical. It's become very much about individual therapies. So we are seeing that we are attracting students who finish undergraduate and they want to do something positive and they don't want to go in a clinical route, and they end up in public health. So that's what's driving these trends, I think. And the jobs. The healthcare sector is expanding. It's expected to be the largest source of job growth in our context. Why is that? Obvious reasons. We have an aging population. We have an urbanizing population. It makes all the sense in the world that healthcare sector is increasing. In our context, ASPPH, which is the Associations of Schools and Programs of Public Health, estimates 250,000 more public health workers needed by 2020. And we have a documented shortage of public health workers in many areas. I don't know what the scene is like in Israel, but given, again, there's a global population aging, Israel is a completely urban country in many ways, I would expect that these trends would be exactly the same thing. So what about the MPH? So the MPH, which is a Masters of Public Health, which is the canonical degree that we give in our School of Public Health, is, as with the higher education more broadly, is our workhorse degree, and it is what drives what we do as we think about our education. We also have doctoral programs that I'll show you in a second, but the MPH ultimately shapes everything we do. Master's degrees in public health have been rising constantly, about 33% increase in schools of public health. Now, who are our schools of public health? We are about 70% female. I don't know what it's like here, but we have been for the past decade, 70% female. In our context, we have tuition costs. There's serious tuition costs, which of course reflect back on the issues I told you about earlier in terms of accountability and students wanting value for their money. There are fewer non-loan financial options available, meaning students are taking out loans. And as we've grown, we have more and more regulation. I'm sort of envious of the position that you are all in right now. You're thinking about school of public health, which is exciting, which means you probably sort of do things in an innovative way. In our context, there's quite a bit of regulation about what we do, because as the field has matured, our degrees of freedom as where we can go have narrowed quite a bit. So in our context, there have been a series of reports and meetings that really in the past 5 years have shaped the landscape of where we're headed in public health education. It started with something called the Framing the Future Task Force in 2012, so it's now 4 years ago, which was chaired by the Association of Schools of Public Health. There were two conferences. One was held at Columbia, which I was the key organizer of in 2013, another one at Harvard, which were both sort of punctuating these reports. There was a blue ribbon panel of employers in September of 2013, which is to say, what are you looking for in public health people? And there was an expert panel report in December of 2013. And these reports in the past 5 years have really changed the landscape of what we're thinking about in terms of public health education. So let me just talk about each of these. So first of all, there was the Framing the Future Task Force. The Framing the Future Task Force was on the occasion of the Welch-Rose report. Welch-Rose report was 100 years ago, which came out of Johns Hopkins at that time, which was really the only school of public health at the time of any consequence. And it really was trying to reflect on where we're headed in public health. It elaborated on a number of the things that I told you about earlier in terms of the trends in public health, which is expansion of programs, moving to an education where you're training people for competencies to say, what should our people learn, thinking about expanded career options, increasing educational technology, and increased the number of schools. It resulted in an increasing number of schools and programs that were accredited from 50 to 100. So we actually have now about 100 accredited schools and programs of public health in the United States. Then there was the blue ribbon panel of employers. It was intended to get us perspectives of the skills we need in the next generation. And here's what emerged from this. Number one, there's a core value, which is a commitment to the health of populations. This is the point I was making earlier, which is that we are getting more and more students who believe in the mission of public health, who want to do public health because they want to be a part of improving the health of populations. Number two, that public health and healthcare system must work together. I'm going to circle back to that point. The opportunities for public health workers are broadening, and that our students need a mix of core analytic skills, big data, law, and policy. But the essential elements of public health education are problem solving, management teamwork, global perspectives, analytic methods, technology, budgeting, finance, communication. So really, if you think about these, right, these are not educational competencies that dwell in disciplines. I notice, as sad as it makes me, none of these say epidemiology. That doesn't mean that our students don't need to learn epidemiology. It means that from the employer's perspective, yes, they are hiring someone because they have skills in epidemiology, but they want to make sure that they are hiring graduates who can solve problems, who can manage well, who can play well with others, who think globally, who are adept at budgeting, finance, and who can communicate. Now, when you see something like this, I think as a school of public health, you have two choices, right? You have choice A is to say, well, that's nice. We'll just keep training our students in epidemiology, biostatistics, and our usual stuff, and then hope that they get these things. Or you can say, well, this is what we need to do, and does our education prepare our students for this? I think the short answer to this question in September of 2013 was actually no. Like, there was no real public health education in our context, and you'll have to educate me about your context, which really made a serious effort to train students in any of this. Like, we just sort of let this go. We would train people in the disciplines and say, well, if you're a good communicator, you know, God bless, that's good for you. But we're making no effort to train our students in this. And I think this was a real wake-up call for many of us in public health higher education, which says, well, this is where we should be headed. Are we preparing our students for this kind of world? And then there was the, in 2013, the MPH expert panel report. which had, this is the report, had 3 key elements: is key consideration, design features, and critical content. So let me talk about each of these. Number 1, the MPH expert panel made it very clear that we need to make sure that the Masters of Public Health is very clearly distinguished from a Bachelor's of Public Health, as well as from a Doctor of Public Health. And from what I understand about your system, that's also quite relevant in terms of people who are getting undergraduate versus graduate education. Number 2, there should be more skills-based Masters of Public Health, giving people depth in particular areas. And number 3, to make it clear that the Master of Public Health is a professional degree. It's different than a Master of Science. It is specifically intended to train people in public health as a broad inculcation into the profession, which is different than a Master of Science, which I'll get to in a second, which is a much more in-depth dive into one particular area. And it should be more integrated and dynamic to reflect workforce needs. So that's number 1, key considerations. Number 2, design features. So there was a lot of emphasis on this notion of a body of public health knowledge. There should be core knowledge that students are imparted that should come in some sort of way, not in 5 core courses, but in an integrated way. So the way we were teaching public health in the United States was everybody got a course in epidemiology, course in biostatistics, course in health policy and management, course in environmental health, and a course in, I'm missing something. Anyway, 5 core courses. And of course the courses were offered by different departments, and the departments never talked to each other. I was chair of the department, and I mean, I hated the chair of the other department. I never talked to him. And I'm sure that's the case everywhere. So part of the recommendation was that makes no sense. If we're actually truly trying to teach students in an integrated way, we need to break that up. Now, how do you break that up? That's not so easy. I'm going to show you what we've been doing. There should be sequential training that helps students build their skills. And we should be building concentrations that suit the demands of the workforce, not just being stuck in our traditional areas. And we should have integrated work experiences tied to what the student is learning, so that we can train the student in that leadership, management, and all those key aspects that we hear from employers are the key aspects of our learning. So I started off with why public health is changing, graduate education, public health education broadly, and then the Master of Public Health. So now I want to take you to our particular example as to what we're doing at the Boston University School of Public Health, figuring that that would be helpful in terms of you understanding what we're doing and you being able to ask me questions. So let me now move to what we have been doing. So just quickly about us, we are one of 17 schools and colleges at Boston University. Boston University is a large private research university. In the American context, there is a distinction between private universities and public universities. From the point of view of funding, really, how the universities are funded. I think we're the 4th largest private research university in the country, with about 32,000 students overall as a university. And our university is, I think, typical of the newer. I mean, we're about 200 years old. In the American context, you have the 300, 400-year-old Ivies. Then you have a sort of cohort of 100 to 200-year-old private universities, which we are in. And typical of our cohort, it was initially started heavily in education and then moved dramatically into research in the past 50 years. That's sort of the evolution of our university. As a school of public health, we're sort of one of the top 10 schools of public health by the rankings, if you believe any of that, putting us in the unusual position of having 2 top 10 schools in Boston, with us and Harvard both being there, which has also resulted in some interesting differentiation for us, which I'm happy to talk about afterwards. To give you a sense, we're about a $100 million school, US dollars. We have 150 full-time faculty. We have more than 1,000 students, the vast majority of those being MPH. So our picture looks very similar to what I showed you nationally, which is the vast majority, like 80+% of our students are MPH. We currently give an MPH in various concentrations, just like everybody else. We currently give MPHs in different departments, and I'm going to show you we're changing all of that. We also give an MS, we give a PhD and a DRPH. That's who we currently are. So there was a curriculum revision process that started in the school 4 years ago. I have been at the school now for about 15 months, and so I intersected with this process when it was at an interesting phase in the process, but it's now, and I can tell you more about the sort of interpersonal dynamics of how that worked out if people are interested. They started by doing a systematic assessment of strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, engage leadership. There was a task force that met twice a week for, every 2 weeks for 9 months. And there were several working groups and town meetings. There were also retreats of school leadership. It was an open process, and it was, broadly speaking, a disaster. Essentially the whole school was up in arms, fighting with each other. People who were otherwise friends hated each other, and the whole thing was really an unhappy experience. I thought I'd be honest in my description. What I think the school learned from that is that it doesn't matter how open you are, if there isn't clarity of focus as to where we're headed, these processes are difficult and don't lead to anything. I came into the school sort of when this process was really in a muddled state, and I had the advantage of having led this exact same process at Columbia, where I was before, which was about a year ahead of Boston University on this. So I actually came in having had the experience of having already made several mistakes at Columbia, and then moving to Boston University, saying, now I can make all new mistakes, and which was great. It was very helpful to the process, because then it really jolted it back into track and put us where we are today, which is essentially we're going to have a brand new MPH coming up online in a few months. The school, as Opportunities and Challenges, had done departmental reviews, never really done a program-wide review. The school has changed its demographics dramatically. Younger students, I'm going to show you the student demographics in a second, moved dramatically to full-time students. And students were before totally exploiting the system, taking courses completely out of sequence, completely defeating the principle of taking integrated courses. As you all know here, once you set the rules, students follow the rules. And if the rules have loopholes in them that allow students to take courses 7 before course 3, they will do that. If you let them do it, they will do it, because they'll fit it around their lives. And I don't mean it in a bad way. That's what I would do as well if I were a student. Which is, of course, it's up to the institution to make sure the student cannot take course 7 before course 3. Here is what our students look like. About more than 90% of them are working full-time or doing advanced education within 6 months of graduation in something of their choice. So our students do very well in terms of work. Average salary is a public health salary. Our students' average salary is about $55,000 a year, range $25,000 to about $95,000, which is reasonable in public health. 80% of our students work in the US, about 20% end up working globally. Now, this is the pie chart of what our students end up doing. And I think this is very important, because this is one of the things which I faced when I entered the school. When I entered the school, the senior faculty said to me, I came in, I said, look, for all the reasons which I've told you here, the curriculum needs to change. I understand there's been this process going on that's been a bit of a disaster, and I understand that we're not heading anywhere, but we need to do this, and we need to do this new curriculum, and we need to do it quickly. And faculty said to me, senior faculty said, well, what are you talking about? Why do we need to do this? We have all these experienced students. They come into us, they have all this experience in the world, and they all want to do part-time education anyway. Just let them do what they're doing. So I look at the data, and I find out actually it's not true, because A, our students were not part-time. They were all full-time, as I showed you. They used to be part-time 20 years ago, but senior faculty have long memories, at least in my context. Maybe here is totally different. But in my context, what I find is senior faculty say, this is the truth. And yes, it was the truth 20 years ago, and they seem to have forgotten to update their truth. So they said, everybody comes to us with experience. So, really? Well, actually, our model age student is a 26-year-old woman. That's not that much experience. They're like, oh, okay, well, it used to be students had experience, but they don't anymore. And then they also said to me, we know what we're doing. We're training students to go out and work in health departments. So I said, really? Well, let's look at the data. So this is what the data show. They are correct. We are training students to work in local health departments. We're training exactly 3% of our students to work in local health departments. When I showed this to our senior faculty, they're like, oh, okay. Well, it's different than what we thought. I'm like, yes, it's different, because this is what the truth was 20 years ago. It's different now. So here's what our students do. About fully a third of them work in hospitals or healthcare providers. And then you have consulting, pharma, biotech, other industry, health insurance. The summary is that 1/3 work in healthcare, fully 1/3 work in industry, work in the for-profit sector, and about 1/3 work in the public or academic sectors. That is a very different picture of the kind of students you're graduating than if you think you're graduating students to work in public health departments. So for us, looking at this became a clear wake-up call to say, well, are we training students to do this? I think there's a larger question, which is, well, is this the kind of student we want to train? I think broadly we're pretty happy with that. Broadly we think, yes, this is the kind of student we want to train, because ultimately public health needs to deal with changing trends, and we need to partner with industry, need to partner with healthcare sectors, need to partner with public and academic environments, so that's fine. This is okay. And this is all okay. But are we training students to meet this need? So we move the process along to say what should be the guiding principles for our curriculum. And we wanted to make sure that it was focused on competencies, what our graduates will know and be able to do. We wanted to produce graduates who employers want to hire, and we wanted to make sure that we monitor this as we went along. So we also started a task force in parallel with the MPH task force called an evaluation task force to develop new ways of evaluating the MPH as we went along, and that's also still moving forward. So the goal of our new program, number one, we want to make sure it serves our mission to improve population health. Number two, to promote diversity, inclusion in our student body, curriculum, student programming. And number three is to break the silos, to stop having epidemiology and biostatistics, environmental health offering their own courses, nobody talking to each other, and to create a true public health education. Not an epidemiology education, not a biostatistics education, not a health policy education, not an environmental health education, not a community health science education, but a public health education. So now let me tell you about what we're doing. So the way we are seeing it is we have a spectrum of educational engagement going from undergraduate to master's to doctoral. And all throughout that, we also have something we call lifelong learning, which is a combination of digital education and opportunities for students to be a part of our training, even if they're not in-house, even if they're not matriculating degree students. Let me start with undergraduate. So undergraduate, we do not have an undergraduate public health degree. What we have are introductory courses and a minor in public health. All undergraduates can take minor in public health. Most students who take this are from our School of Rehabilitation Sciences, which we call Sargent, the College of Arts and Sciences, and our business school. The other thing we have that we have quite a number of students on, and we are having more and more every day, is something we call our 4+1 program. A 4+1 program is a program where students who are in undergraduate and in bachelor's in our university can apply to graduate school, to public health school, and they get in their third year of undergraduate. And then they do only one more year to finish an MPH. So it's 4 undergraduate plus 1 year. That is increasingly looking like an attractive model to our students because they're doing things efficiently, and it's attractive to us because we get outstanding students. In our context, the undergraduate students tend to be, generally speaking, a higher functioning level of student than the graduate students. I don't know what's like in your context. That's certainly been the case in all universities I've worked in the United States. Simply, I think it's just a larger pool. There's more students in undergraduate. You have a selective university. You get very good undergraduates. So it works for us. And it also works for the undergraduate colleges. Because for them, it's very attractive. If you're in the College of Arts and Science, you say to your students, look, you can get a great education in history, and you can also combine it by then applying for and getting an MPH that is combined with your education in history. Now, how about our masters? So our masters has about 1,000 students in it right now. They really come from all states of the union and from about 25 countries. As I said, we're predominantly women, average age 27. So these are young women. So we actually, our demographics have shifted. As I said before, this was not what we used to be 20 years ago. And it's taken our senior faculty some time to like wrap their brain around the fact that now we are training young women who come out of college. They typically, they may have 1 or 2 years work experience, but they know what they want. They know they want to do an MPH. So from their perspective, why should they wait? This is what they want to do. Our students do work across in the US and throughout the world. They're very active socially. This reflects the shift that I mentioned that we were seeing earlier, that we are getting students who want to be part of social change. And we have evolved. We've evolved to be a younger, more public health, less work experience student body. So where are we going to? So in the fall of 2016, we are launching this new MPH. So this is I suppose, an apposite time to have me speak because it's very much fresh on my mind. And our new MPH will look like this. And this is schematically, I'm going to tell you about each of them. It has an integrated core. There is an interdisciplinary graduate certificate. It has an integrated practicum and integrated learning experience with career development throughout. Notice nowhere there does it say education within departments. Nowhere does it say there are core courses in epidemiology, biostatistics, etc. So let me lead you through one by one. So let me start with the integrated core curriculum. So this is what our education looks like today. This is what the education looks like in nearly all the schools of public health in the United States. And in the fall of 2016, instead of this, our students will move to that, which is 4 integrated broad modules, which are quantitative methods, individual community population health, health systems, law and policy, and leadership and management. Notice how leadership and management has been elevated to one of the 4 essential elements of an integrated core. When you compare that to before, it wasn't even there, right? So we're now giving a quarter of the core over to something that we never even taught to begin with, based on this reflection from our employers about what it is that they want our students to know. These modules are no longer taught in departments, and every MPH student will take this exact same core. So the entire cohort will take the exact same core, and they will, when they emerge from the school, as the dean, I will be able to say with confidence, all our students know all of this. So that's step 1. That's the integrated core. It provides a foundation across disciplines. It focuses on solving complex public health problems, and it teaches the foundation in these 4 modules I told you about. Number 2, and now this is perhaps the most radical aspect. Students are no longer doing an MPH within disciplines. They are no longer doing an MPH in epidemiology, MPH in biostatistics. What they are doing is they're taking the core curriculum and they are choosing 2 interdisciplinary certificates. They have a functional area and a context area. I'm going to show you those in a second. And we have a total of 17 certificates, which means if you choose 2 of those, if you do your math, there are about 353 unique combinations that a student can take. So students are really now tailoring their education to what they want. And there are 2 types of certificates. There's functional and context. Here are the functional certificates. You have community assessment and program design, design of public health research, environmental hazard assessment, epidemiology and biostatistics, health communication, health policy, healthcare management, monitoring and evaluation, and program management. So these are intended to represent the skills that our students want. And this is context, matching those skills with the areas that they're interested in. Non-communicable disease, global health, infectious disease, maternal child health, mental health, pharmaceuticals, sex, sexuality, and gender, social justice, human rights, and health equity. Each of these certificates require of the students at least 4 courses. Some require more, but they're 4 to 6 typically. They are formally recognized by the university, so that means when a student graduates, she will have on her certificate a Master of Public Health with a certificate in epidemiology and biostatistics and a certificate in social justice, human rights, and health equity. Or a student will graduate with a certificate in program evaluation and a certificate in mental health and substance use. The advantage of these certificates is manifold. Number 1, it creates an opportunity for students to really get the depth in the particular area of their choosing. Number 2, it gives us a device to create an educational opportunity that is flexible and fluid. As everybody here knows, in our university setting, it's not so easy to open or shut down departments. Probably shouldn't be, and it's not. But it's very easy for us to create or uncreate certificates because they're just a sequence of courses. So we fully expect, if I'm talking to you about this next year, I would expect to be able to say to you, you know what? At the end of the day, our maternal child health certificate was not working. So we're going to shut it down. And we are going to instead create these 2 other certificates. And we already have a list of other certificates we want to do. One thing that's been very interesting is that as our faculty, once everybody got over fighting each other, then our faculty really sort of went all out in terms of proposing certificates. And we have a long list of certificates that we actually are not launching, just by virtue of trying to keep the list manageable. So then come the certificates. And then the 3rd element of the curriculum is professional development fully integrated with the entire rest of the education. So there's a practicum. So all our students have to do a practicum, which builds practical skills. It's about a 4-month internship. It's tailored to meet the needs of the students. And it's intended to give them skills that cut across their certificates and the core education. And then there's an integrated experience throughout the education, which is an intense opportunity to work in teams throughout their education, to weave in what they're learning in smaller groups. We also have a fairly mature career development program, which students engage with from day 1. So when a student enters our MPH, from day 1, they're engaged with career development. They help students with self-assessment, figuring out how to network and market themselves, career planning, helping them choose their certificates based on what they actually want to do, and having an ongoing series of alumni and recruiter panels. And this is the overall structure. Core curriculum, certificates, practicum, integrated learning experience with career development throughout. This launches in the fall of 16. We are currently piloting all the core education. It's going very well. There remain some challenges in getting all the faculty aligned with doing this. I suspect we'll have challenges for the next couple of years. It'll be superable and we'll be fine at the end. Okay, a few more comments before I conclude on Masters of Science and some of the other educational programs. Master of Science actually is the fastest growing degree program nationally in the US. It is clearly attracting students seeking sort of new career opportunities early to mid-career. They are typically short Masters of Science program in our context. They are 1 year long and they're very practical. The idea is that the MS is very practical and you are somebody who's in the workforce and you say, look, I just want a 1 year, I know what I want. I want to be, I'm working in this organization and what they really need is a data analyst. I love where I'm working. I'm going to get an MS in data analysis. And that's what people come back for their MS for. This is just to give you a sense of the projected growth. This is from a report that just came out in the US. Here's the growth in master's programs that's anticipated. And here is also the projected completions by awards, with more and more people completing their master's degrees than anything else. And here's the shift from our traditional masters to professional masters, to part-time, short, no thesis, not a path to PhD, but a path to employment, not designed around what faculty want, but designed around what employers want, taught by a combination of tenure stream faculty and adjuncts, cross-disciplinary. Students typically pay for it, and typically it's older students with work experience. So this is a different type of masters than most of people in this room have taken. I say that with some confidence because you're all in a university. So this is a different kind of masters than what many of us have taken. This is a pragmatic, practical, short, dictated by work exigencies, direct path to employment Master of Science. It's moving beyond working professionals, moving to sort of understanding what people need in various markets. And it's really intended to be people who are both changing careers right here, which is at the intersection of you entering into a field and moving into a different discipline. So we are launching a suite of 6 Masters of Science in the fall of 2017. And these are what we're launching: MS in Applied Biostatistics, Environmental Health Decision Making, Epidemiology, Health System Services Research, Pharmaceutical Market Access, and Public Health Nutrition, all informed by these same principles I told you about. We also have a Master's of Health and Administration. Quick note about doctoral education, and I'll conclude. All of this integrates with a differentiation, a more explicit differentiation in our doctoral education from the academic doctoral degrees to the professional doctoral degree. The academic doctoral degree is what I would expect most of you have in this room, because it is what those of us who drifted to the academic world did, but clearly differentiated from the professional doctoral degree, which is a Doctor of Public Health, which focuses much more on leadership, management, and policy. And building lifelong learning, which is a suite of digital, not degree programs that provide an opportunity for students to take courses across modalities. And with the notion that a student comes to an educational institution, doesn't just come and go, but remains engaged through opportunities to take lifelong learning throughout the course of her or his career. And this is what our lifelong learning module will look like. This is actually about to be launched right now, where it's going to be a combination of learning live, online, learning anytime, as well as learning over time with not for-credit courses, and also moving to for-credit courses. That's it. I will stop there. Happy to take questions. I hope I give you enough of a background, but also try to give you some of the real nitty-gritty of what we're actually doing to be able to be useful to you. Thank you for listening. Questions? Comments? My clarity was dazzling. There's absolutely no questions.
I have a question.
Yes.
What happened, many talks, many things.
Yes.
But what happened with people with disabilities? If someone wants to learn about public health
Yeah.
for people with disabilities, I didn't see here.
Oh, and the certificates, yeah. We actually don't have an explicit certificate on it. We happen to have, in the American context, learning about disabilities has typically not existed in public health. Typically has been outside of public health in rehabilitation schools in the American context. I mentioned that we have a rehabilitation school where we actually get a lot of students. We are in an unusual position as a school of public health. We actually have a Health and Disability Research Institute in our school. So we happen to have quite a bit of scholarship on disability, but we don't have a disability certificate, something that we could do in future if there's more interest in it. I don't know how much interest we would have from our students, because students who are interested in disabilities tend to go into rehabilitation schools in our context. It might be different here. I don't know. Yeah.
You shared the figure about the number of students, the growing trend in the number of students going into public health. I was wondering if it's not the same trend in other areas. Is it different in other areas?
It's different in other areas. I mean, there is an overall increase in students in education, period, but it's quite different, say, like in engineering. It's quite different in law, for example. I mean, law has been the opposite. Quite different in engineering, which has largely been flat. Trying to think of sort of our other graduate schools, peers. Medicine doesn't really compare because that's been largely flat as well over time. Dentistry has been increasing, so it's been quite a difference in different fields. Yeah. Yes.
Well, thank you very much. I think it was really very important for us, especially when we think now about maybe changing the way we teach public health in this university. And you know, it's kind of like we talk about school of 1,000 teachers and 1,000 students coming in, 160 full-time faculty. It's a very different scale that we have here. And but the idea you raised are really interesting. And I was wondering how competitive is admission to the school? Like, you know, what kind of students are? You say that you're getting the good type, want to change the world, but you know how competitive it is.
Yeah, so so these data are all available. Across all schools of public health in the US, admission rate is about 60%. So we're admitting in the 60-70% range, and this is pretty standard across schools. And the yield, which means people who are admitted who then come, is about 1/3, and it's pretty consistent across schools. So is it competitive? It's not nowhere near as competitive as undergraduate education, right? And so in our undergraduate, the admission rate at our university, undergraduate, I think is it's like 15%. So it's much less competitive from that perspective. And the students, which I guess is implicit in your question, they are not as academically they're not academic stars that you have in undergraduate. There's no question about it, which is actually why I mentioned that 4+1 program, which is very attractive because you get the academic stars and you funnel them straight into your MPH program. In our system, there is the GRE system, which is very much used as a cutoff by all schools, really. So the students are good. They're fine. They're not the standout academic stars, but frankly, there are very few standout academic stars at the graduate level, period. And where when they are there, they don't tend to go into professional degrees. They go straight into doctoral degrees. Well, I'm happy to stay around afterwards and have conversations in any way that's helpful. Thank you very much.